Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, Master of Lore and Storyteller Extraordinaire. I do apologize for the slightly different accommodations here. As it stands, currently my usual workspace is a bit overwhelmed with, well, other projects relating more to my day to day life currently. Um, actually, let me show you here. Ta da! Working on all sorts of baby stuff here. But hopefully, once this is all said and done, we can resume back to our normal activities and our normal space and keep this thing rolling right along just fine here. But with that said, let's go ahead and get going on today's topic. Now, so far, when it's been coming to um, talking about how to put together better campaigns, I've talked about broader concepts, larger ideas that apply pretty much any kind of a setting you could think about putting together, whether that's Pathfinder, Shadowrun, even stuff using the Fate system or Rollmaster. These ideas and concepts could be transferred pretty easily and work for just about any sort of game rule set that you're using at your tabletop sessions. But now we're going to start getting just a little bit more technical here, but I have absolute faith in you folks for being able to keep up and understand all this stuff going on. Now, when it comes to these kinds of games, especially turn based games, and regardless if it's a tabletop RPG or you're breaking out Magic the Gathering or some kind of a board game where you're all taking turns, you're going to be dealing with what's called the action economy. An action economy basically means you have a certain amount of moves that you can make allotted to you per turn. What those moves are depends on what resources you have available, whether it's a specific set of cards you can play, like in Magic the Gathering. If you're going to lay down some mana, tap that mana to summon a creature, throw down an enchantment, or if you're playing Pathfinder, are you going to move and make an attack? Are you going to move twice or just make an all out charge? Or if you're right next to your target, are you going to do a full attack action? Or, if you're a spellcaster, are you going to be taking a turn or a few actions to unleash a spell or two while you're going over things? Now, where this gets to be important, understanding the action economy as far as being a storyteller goes, well, it lets you know just how much your characters and NPCs are capable of accomplishing on their turn. Lower level characters tend to have fewer things that they can do with each action, whereas higher level characters or very advanced monsters, creatures, and NPCs will typically be capable of doing much more within a shorter amount of time. So, it gives you an idea on roughly on how you can plan things out a bit. I say roughly in that when it comes to dice and player ingenuity, it's hard to account for that random chance and whatever crazy ass idea goes through the player's mind at a given time. But this should still be able to help you scale things and set up some appropriate encounters for the players, just understanding how the action economy works. Now, when it comes to setting all this up and understanding all of this, you want to understand the game's mechanics. Let's take spellcasting, for example. It tends to be arguably spellcasters across whatever system you're running tend to be pretty powerful just because they're manipulating the laws of physics, quantum mechanics, all of this stuff just through a simple act of will or offering up prayers to some patron deity that's supplying them with power. Since these characters are just so inherently powerful, especially as they level up and become more advanced, invest their skill points appropriately, the spells that they gain access to offer a wider and wider range of abilities and the potential to deal out a lot of damage or just outright negate problems that the players may come across. Now, that said, if the players have a powerful spellcaster, you may as well employ a few of your own. Um, let's just dive right into it here. One of my favorite examples to look at when talking about game mechanics and action economy and all of that are spells from the Dungeons and Dragons series, uh, Fireball and Haste. Now, Fireball is a classic spell. It's a classic blast or attacking spell, and it just feels really cool. Does a fair amount of damage. It affects a 20-foot radius, meaning anything within that 20-foot radial area is subject to the damage it deals, and it, uh, at least at first glance, seems like it does a fair amount of damage. Starts off dealing 5 six-sided dice worth of damage when the player first gets it, and it tops out at 10 d6 points of damage once the wizard hits level 10, or sorcerer, or whatever other hybrid classes may have access to it within the scope of Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. Now, that seems like a lot at first, but when you break down the mechanics and the mathematics and the averages, let's just keep going with the level 10 fireball for that 10d6 points of damage. That average is about around 30 points of damage there, because the max it can do is 60, the absolute least it can do is 10, so it falls right about in the middle-ish there. Trouble is, at level 10, the appropriate sized and scaled encounters that the players will be coming up against can absorb 30 points of damage pretty reliably. And on top of this, you have to start considering and factoring in certain character aspects like fire resistance, which will reduce the damage. And at level 10, a lot of creatures just have outright fire immunity, so it deals no damage. And then we also factor in that anything within that blast radius for a fireball has the opportunity to make a reflex save, which will reduce damage by half. So let's not worry about anything like fire resistance or fire immunity. Let's just go off of a reflex save. At level 10, not everything has a great reflex save, but plenty of things do. And remember, we're rolling a 20-sided dice, and, well, a lot of things will stand decent odds of reducing that damage by half. So that 30-ish points of damage gets knocked down to 15, around 17 points of damage right off the bat there. So 15 points of damage, yeah, plenty of level 10 creatures can eat that up, no problem. And again, we left out fire resistance and fire immunity right there. And don't forget that rogues and maybe a few certain other character classes gain an ability to where if they fail their reflex save, they just automatically reduce that damage by half. And if they succeed, no damage at all. So fireball potentially just, it looks great at first, 10 six-sided dice worth of damage. Well, that kind of gets dropped down quite a bit there. Even if the players are lucky enough to roll in the upper end for 40 to 50-ish or even max damage, it's still getting cut in half or completely negated before we start adding in any other extras right on hand there. In comparison to, say, the haste spell, oh, let me just add in here, there's a little bit of a caveat when it comes to 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, just because they've changed how these spells work, and I'll cover that in a moment here. But for now, haste in 3rd edition all the way up through Pathfinder can affect a couple of different creatures at a time at level 10. If I remember right, it's at least 2. And the haste spell will give an extra attack at the character's highest base attack bonus, meaning level 10. Most characters will have, most of your melee type characters like fighters, paladins, rangers, and barbarians are going to have 2 attacks. And so with haste, with the haste spell, they get an extra attack that will have all the bonuses equal to what their first regular attack would be, meaning they now get 2 attacks with the maximum opportunity for them to hit with all their bonuses. So let's say a wizard casts a haste spell rather than fireball, and he throws it down on a barbarian and a fighter. Just for the purposes of keeping math simple here, and I don't go into a long harangue over this, let's just say that both of them have strength scores of 18, and they're both using two-handed greatswords. So two-handed greatsword deals 2d6 points of damage right off the top there. Now, since these are two-handed swords, both the fighter and the barbarian gain bonuses to damage for using these weapons with both hands. Normally, with their strength scores of 18, they get a +4 bonus. Using both hands, it bumps it up to a +6 because they get half a 4 on top of it. So that's a minimum of 8 damage if they roll snake eyes to a top of 18 damage. So they're going to be floating right around about the 12, 14 points of damage range there. Now, since they get 3 attacks each, that's a potential right there of, well, let's see. Fighter, let's say he does 14, so 14, 28, 42 points of damage right there if he hits with all 3 attacks, and it's the same for the barbarian. So that's a potential of 84 points of damage right there. But let's say their second attacks miss, so it's only the first and third. That's still 24 points. Let's see here. 14, 28, 14, 28, so 48, 56 points of damage right there. And that's already outclass Fireball pretty quickly and pretty readily there. And we're not factoring anything in like if the weapons are magical, if they have feats like power attack that let them boost their damage even more. It just can stack up and up and up, and the damage potential just goes further and further the more we keep adding in. And then on top of that, on top of these characters in their action economy being able to do more and output more damage by attacking more often, the haste spell will give them extra movement so they can move further and cover more ground, and a bonus to their defense, so they're a little bit harder to hit. And oh yeah, it also gives them a bonus to hit. Now, these bonuses to hit and defense are just an extra 1 point for each, which it's not the biggest bonus ever, but you know what? It's icing on the cake right there when you throw in the extra movement speed as well as the extra attack. So when you consider that characters under 5th level who do not get wizards that are under 5th level who won't have access to a fireball or a haste spell, at least not as ready access, you can see where things begin to jump a bit more. Higher level characters with a certain amount of consideration for these abilities, feats, and spells that they pick out can begin to accomplish a lot more. So, if they can accomplish a lot more, your monsters and your NPCs that you throw at the players should also be able to accomplish a lot more. Hopefully, your players are working together and strategizing a bit as they play, but the creatures and encounters that you throw your players' way should be able to help eat up some of their abilities and capabilities. You want that wizard to burn a few extra spells, so that way when it comes to the big boss encounter, they don't have quite so many options on hand. Now, again, if they play well and the dice are being especially kind to them, they may make it through just fine anyways. But in understanding the action economy and setting up encounters and being ready to just kind of ad-lib things, maybe change things up a little bit on the fly, say adding in a few extra NPCs to help the big bad that you have at the end of the adventure, it can still help to offset this, but this should still give you an idea on understanding the game's mechanics and the action economy. Now, oh, I said I'd mentioned the changes made in Fifth Edition. Well, Fifth Edition Dungeons and Dragons, they altered how Fireball and Haste work. Haste affects one creature at a time, and the wizard has to maintain concentration in order to keep the spell going. Whereas Third Edition and Pathfinder, and I believe even Fourth Edition, it was kind of fire and forget, affect both targets, and watch them go for a few extra rounds there with some pretty hefty bonuses. So it got nerfed a little bit, but it still has plenty of abilities, gives advantages on dexterity saves. Um, it gives bonuses to defense and their movement. And it also gives them an extra action, so they can choose to either move more or make an extra attack. So it's not quite as powerful and potentially game breaking like the third edition, fourth edition, and Pathfinder versions are, but it's still a pretty solid and reliable spell and still contributes overall to giving extra actions within the mechanics of action economy. Now, Fireball in 5th edition has also been significantly changed. It deals, if I remember correctly from reading over it, it deals about 8d6 points of damage the instant it's gotten. So right off the bat there, instead of like its third edition counterpart dealing 5d6 points of damage, it begins dealing 8 right off the bat. So definitely quite a bit more of a damage output there. And even though at 5th level, there's still some creatures running around with decent fire resistance there, you're still getting a higher degree of damage out of it right off the bat, which makes the spell that much more useful. Not only that, but once you get to higher levels and the wizard classes gain access to higher and higher level spell slots, they can cast that third level fireball spell as if it were a higher level and get more damage out of it. To add to this further, the wizard classes have some unique abilities that kind of take the place of some of the older feats from third edition, letting them essentially shape their spells a little bit. So remember how before I mentioned that Fireball has a 20-foot radius that it affects? Well, a wizard that specializes in evocation, evoking energies and powers to deal damage, they can shape the spell so that they can create little safe spaces for their friends. So if the fighter and the barbarian are actively in melee, and there's a good group of enemies clustered around them, now the wizard doesn't have to worry about, if I throw this out there, I could potentially burn the ever-loving crap out of my friends. Now they can go, oh, no problem, and throw it off there and create little gaps in the blast radius that let their allies stay safe while cooking the crap out of their enemies. So definitely adds quite a bit more versatility and usefulness to the spell there, especially if the wizard in question specializes as an evoker in evocation. Now, with all of that said right there with regards to the game's mechanics and the action economy and understanding just how different lower level players operate and function in comparison to higher level players, anybody who's been watching this for a while now knows that for me, story's the number one thing. Understanding the mechanics and the rules and how to manage these sorts of action economies is important and helps you to plan and run your games a bit better, but story is always going to be number one. Even in instances, third edition and Pathfinder, where Fireball's not always the most useful option, the most useful blasting spell for dealing damage, you can still get creative with it and do other things, like especially if you're using these spells in conjunctions with other activities. Again, this kind of comes back down to managing your action economy, but for you dungeon masters, you storytellers, MCs, whatever title you go by, if you plan things out and think ahead a little bit, or if your players plan things out and think ahead a little bit, you can still manage your action economy in such a way that, well, you basically leave yourself with all the time you need. Let me give you an example here. It's a story a cousin of mine told me from a game session a long time ago, back when he was, oh, I forget. Anyways, that's not the point. This particular group that they are running, from level 1 on to about level 7, they just kept giving their wizard shit. They just kept piling onto him, endlessly heckling him, giving him crap nonstop, to the point that the player was getting a little bit frustrated and figured that this wizard was probably just outright pissed about the situation. So, after a particular run, they came back with all their loot, had all this awesome gear, and they partied at the tavern and ended up passing out in their rooms, pretty well hammered. Well, the wizard, his player, well, he'd taken the silent magic feat, letting him cast his magic without having to use the verbal components. It was all just the somatic hand movements and gesticulating, and he cast the silent spell. So the entire room was just enshrouded with this barrier of silence, absolutely no sound whatsoever, which left him free to cast the web spell over the party, so that they were all bound down to the webs, and these magically generated and appeared. The players were left totally unaware of what had happened, especially since there was no sound. And then, since there's no sound and all of his party members are now bound by magical webs to their beds and drunk and soundly asleep, he started taking all the loot, just hauled everything out, all their equipment, all the money, all the precious artifacts and items and gemstones, everything. He cleaned house. Then he went outside, and, well, they don't have any of their protective gear, they're asleep, and they're bound in webs. He fireballed the room they were in. No reflex saves, so they took plenty of damage, and the webs catching fire, well, that did extra damage, and whoever survived was trapped in a burning room. The entire party died, and, well, the players tried to protest. The DM just went, well, sorry guys, there's not much I can do about that. And then the wizard left and sold all the gear he didn't need, and basically became the new villain for the next adventure. So, thinking ahead and planning like that, while he wasn't in a combat situation, but still thinking about in terms of action economy and all of that, he created a situation by thinking ahead where he didn't have to worry about all of that, and also he didn't have to worry about all the mathematical, mechanical effectiveness of a spell like Fireball. He just created a situation where it was just going to be effective. Other situations where this might work, either for yourself or your players, let's say at sea, having a wizard on hand at sea would certainly be incredibly useful, especially if, say, you have a ship full of pirates going to attack the players, the vessel that they're on. Well, maybe the wizard and the pirates don't want the vessel to be sunk or on fire, or at least not totally set ablaze. Throwing a fireball into the sails, into the rigging, just burning all that crap away so that the ship can't move anywhere. Well, making a ship a sitting duck certainly is useful, and, well, again, the fireball is not the most effective blast spell in that situation. It's incredibly useful. Same thing for the players. If the players decide, we don't want to fight a bunch of pirates right now, we got crap to do, and they throw the fireball out and they blast the sails on the pirate ship, well, that creates a bit of a problem. Pirates now got to fix the sails, and now this ship can get away in that meantime. Or, because it's a sitting duck, they can just start blasting the crap out of the pirate ship without having to worry. But it comes back down to understanding the mechanics of the game, the action economy, when it applies, and how to create situations where it doesn't apply. It just requires a bit of forethought and planning there. And this applies across, again, multiple systems. Any game most of these games have all different sorts of haste spells that allow characters to move further on their movement phase or attack more often and give them all sorts of other bonuses and added benefits. It's incredibly useful. Another spell that's incredibly useful, and this applies across every single game that I've mentioned so far, all the Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Rollmaster, Shadowrun, doesn't matter which of these it is. Anything that lets the players summon an ally NPC, whether it's a summon monster spell, or if in Shadowrun they're summoning up some sort of nature spirit, or even a toxic spirit, or even Rollmaster where they're summoning whatever geographically appropriate animals are available. Summoning creatures is incredibly useful, even if they're not the most versatile or overwhelmingly powerful creatures. It's an extra set of hit points and another body to throw at the problem. Where this gets to be useful is, again, this comes back down to the action economy. They used an action to create another creature on hand, or potentially creatures, depending on how big a spell it is, that they can throw at their enemies. So that's extra attacks, extra movements, all just off of one action right there. And not only that, but it forces your NPCs, this combat encounter you've created, it forces them to choose between swinging at this new set of creatures attacking them, or swinging at the player characters. If your enemies are particularly smart and clever, or in a position to do so, attacking the caster is definitely a good strategy, and it's a good way for you to show just how threatening the opponents are, where they understand the need to take down the caster or geek the mage. But if they're not, or they're just not able to, and they're forced to begin attacking these summoned monsters, that's still a win for the player characters, because that's damage to a summoned creature that's just gonna go away later at the end of combat. Shadowrun, it's a little bit more complicated, because the shaman or the mage that summons the spirit has to work to keep control of it. But if they do, great. If not, well, the spirit may go rogue and decide to attack them. So it gets a little bit more complicated in that game. But even still, that same basic fundamental rule applies. It's an allied NPC for the moment. You can direct it to attack your enemies. Your enemies may end up having to spend some of their actions attacking it. So if the attack misses, fantastic. If the attack hits, still fantastic, because that's damage done to an NPC that, again, is going to go away later. Not only that, but the summoning spells, at least for the D20 Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons games, to a certain extent, can let you position the monsters in different spots. So you can create flanking opportunities to let rogues get their backstab damage in, or create opportunities for to create a screen for for a player's fighter character to get out safely and get back for just a moment to get a little bit of extra healing, or literally any sort of tactical retreat can be covered a bit more by throwing out this summon monster spell. And again, that's something that works within the realm of this of the game mechanics and this action economy. And also, well, it's a wizard. Wizards summoning monsters is just a staple. It's just a classic thing, and it fits within things story-wise pretty readily. And it's always a handy thing to have. It's going to be useful in a wide variety of situations, especially as you get to the higher and higher level summon monster, summon creature abilities. Rollmaster in particular, I got to see the effectiveness of some of the various summon monster spells, and holy crap, it just creates all sorts of havoc and chaos within the realm of game mechanics. And it's still, like I said, at least in my eyes, in very many different contexts and different game situations, is story appropriate, is character appropriate, and it's just an incredibly useful thing. Now, characters like fighters and the like tend to not have quite as many options as far as action economy goes, but again, this just comes back to how creative you get and how much you think about things beforehand and how much the players' characters, through role playing, think about things beforehand where they create situations where they can get more mileage out of their actions. There's nothing wrong with playing your character smart and playing them through story while still understanding the mechanics of the game. Again, like I keep saying and will always reiterate, story is the number one thing. Story and having fun are the number one things right there. They're tied for number one. There's no one or two in this case, but understanding the game mechanics in order to play a bit more effectively, there's nothing wrong with that. How much you want to do this, how much you want to understand the mechanics and play by the mechanics is going to depend on both the storyteller as well as the players, and hopefully you guys are talking together and understanding just how much you want to play by mechanics or focus more on story. Hopefully story's the big thing because that's just part of what makes this so much fun. Anyways, I rambled on long enough about game mechanics and action economy and giving you some examples on how to use various spells within the game mechanics to make the action economy work more and work more effectively. And also, hopefully, it inspires you all, players and DMs alike, to think about these things just a little bit more as you play your characters, as you play through these games, and create these awesome stories. Thank you all very much for your time. Have yourselves a good night. Oh, and before I forget, if you like today's video, please hit the like and subscribe button. Also, click the bell icon so that way you get notified the next time I upload another video to you folks. Now you have yourselves a good night.